I think people sometimes get confused. This is different from the Clergy Project per se. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us about the differences?
Well, the differences are huge, although some of the participants are the same in both operations. The clergy study began before the Clergy Project was ever thought of. The Clergy Project has only been in existence since 2011, and it is a private website for clergy who no longer hold supernatural beliefs. And there wouldn't be a Clergy Project unless there had been a clergy study. And there wouldn't be a Clergy Project if it had not been for Richard Dawkins and Dan Barker, who talked together, it was my understanding, I was long before I knew either one of them, at a conference, and thought that there should really be something for people caught in this predicament. That they thought there were probably a lot of clergy that did not believe, and that couldn't we do something for them, and they didn't know what that thing would be. And then Dan Dennett and I conducted this study, and as a result of the first study, the pilot study, a lot of people started contacting me and Dan about participating in the second study. So people would hear about it, and they would contact us and say, yes, I'm one of them, and I'd like to participate in the larger study that you're planning on doing. Well, those people formed a list of prospective members of the Clergy Project. And Dan Barker had been informally collecting a list for years, because he would go around the country and around the world giving speeches about his deconversion. And people will come up to him afterwards from the audience and say, I used to be a minister too. And he would take down their name and say, someday we'll have to do something about this. We'll have to get together some kind of a group of former ministers. So from Dan Barker's list and from Dan Dennett and my list, we had a list of, it turned out to be ultimately 52 people who became the first members of the Clergy Project. Now, some of those people participated in the study, and some of them did not. We selected people for the study based on, different, it wasn't anybody who came along and said that they didn't believe anymore. We wanted people who represented a variety of faiths and came from different parts of the country. We wanted a nice mix of people. But in the Clergy Project, anyone who no longer held supernatural beliefs and had been a member of the clergy, either currently or a past member, could be a member of the Clergy Project.
How did you get interested in this project?
Well, the project that I've been working on since 2008, really, with Daniel Dennett on non-believing clergy, I got interested in on my own. I was making my own personal study of Christian history, and it was something actually I should have done, and everybody should do. I should have done long before I did it. I had never really been that interested in religion. I had gone through Sunday school and the sacraments as a Catholic kid, but dropped it after that because of lack of interest. I think the way is not uncommon. And became interested actually after I went to Rome in 2005, and I saw Christianity for the first time through the lens of just somebody learning it and being interested in it. And I saw the art and the architecture and thought that this is something I should really know more about from an academic point of view. And that it was a great lack in my education, and probably the educations of most people, that they hadn't studied it in an objective way. So I started to do that. And as I did that, I was fascinated by what I learned, in the sense that, the most fascinating thing that I learned and what came to this study was that I learned that people who went to seminary, who got their master's degree in divinity, learned all about the Bible and Christianity academically, the way I was learning it then. And they didn't learn about it devotionally, the way, or they were not indoctrinated the way most people are who learn from their parents and learn at church. And one thing stuck with me in particular, and that was Marcus Borg, who's a Lutheran theologian, who said that when he was in seminary, he was shocked at what he was learning. He was fascinated and shocked. And it felt somewhat scandalous, like something he wouldn't want to tell his mother. But yet he went on. And I'm thinking, well, I'm shocked too, but I'm not a 23-year-old seminarian. And if I were learning this at that age, I would get out. I would get out immediately. I wouldn't continue my studies, because I would have learned that the Bible is mythological, that a lot of what happened they found is not possible. It's not archaeologically possible, and that it's it's myth and legend and mythology and metaphor. And so how could they go through seminary knowing all of this and then go out and preach? And that was the question in my mind. And I knew that Dan Dennett had just written a book called Breaking the Spell. And I saw an essay that he did in the Washington Post about Mother Teresa and how she had gone through a dark night of the soul and didn't believe for many years, although she acted as if she did. And he thought that there were probably many people out there like her. And so I contacted him and gave him the basic idea of wanting to do this study. Now I should back up and say that I am a professional qualitative researcher, and I've done many, many studies throughout the past 25 years. And before that I was a clinical social worker, so I'm used to interviewing people about difficult subjects. And it was perfect for me. It was an interest I had, and I wanted to follow up on it. So that's a long answer to your question.
Well, but then how did you make then the next step to actually trying to engage ministers or preachers who had congregations, who were still in the pulpit, who were closeted non-believers or serious doubters? How did you make that next step?
Yeah, they were not easy to find, and we anticipated that would be a problem. I mean, my feeling was that there had to be a lot of people out there, but also that they were keeping quiet about it. Dan Dennett, who became interested in my idea, talked to Dan Barker, who's the head of the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and he's a former pastor himself. Because he wrote a book called Godless that was about his journey from being a pastor to being an atheist, a lot of people contacted him. A lot of pastors who were in the situation he had once been in contacted him. And he was happy to speak with them, but there wasn't really that much he could do for them. But when our study came along, he said, well, you know, you might want to talk to LaScola and Dan Dennett. They're working on this study. So these are essentially people who were desperate. They reached out to Dan Barker because they were desperate, and they spoke to me because they really, really wanted somebody to talk to. And they wanted to do something, I think, they wanted to help society. They wanted what they had gone through to stop happening.
So tell us about the actual projects. I mean, the design of the projects and what they entailed.
The pilot study was of 5 Protestant ministers, and let me just say half of them came through Dan Barker and half of them came through a former pastor of mine from an Episcopal church who ran an organization called the Center for Progressive Christianity. And he just gave me a list of names without knowing what their beliefs were, what their specific beliefs were. We interviewed each person, I should say I interviewed each person 3 times. And the way I came up with this methodology was that I talked to a couple of ministers on my own before starting the study, and I noticed that they liked to talk a lot. They had a lot to say, and that it was, as eager as they were to speak, it was sometimes difficult getting to the most important issues. So I felt that it would be better to conduct this interviews as a series of interviews that would allow me to establish a relationship with them, that would allow them to gain trust in me, and would allow me to follow up on things that it might be difficult for them to express easily at first. So most of the people that I interviewed 3 times. In some cases, if they were former clergy, as we did in the second part of the study, I interviewed them twice. And just a few people I interviewed once, including a couple of seminary students and some seminary professors. The first study was all ministers, active ministers. The second study was a combination of active ministers, priests, rabbis, and people who had been out of the ministry for a while, and some seminary students as well.
And how many all total are we talking about?
We're talking about 35 people altogether, 3 of whom were seminary professors.
What do you feel are the most important findings from your and Dan's study?
They were all very good people. They were all, that was my impression at any rate. They were very good, they were very sincere, they were struggling greatly. They had gone into ministry because they wanted to do something good for people. They wanted to be respected in their communities. Their motives were positive. And then because they were curious, they and wanted to understand more, they found that their doubts and what they were learning pulled them away from what they had originally wanted to do, and it was very painful for them. I think that it has to be that these people are not particularly unusual. What's unusual is that they were so desperate that they wanted to talk to me. They wanted to do something about it, for themselves and for other ministers. They really wanted to make sure that this word got out.
What was it that these ministers were desperate to get out there?
They wanted people to know what they had learned. They wanted people to know about the science that they had learned. They wanted to tell me and tell others that the devotional aspects of Christianity that they learned weren't working for them anymore and would not be, should not, let's say, be useful to other people. That in their studies they had learned everything I had learned in my studies, and it shook them, and they still had a very strong feeling of wanting to help people, and they still loved the other aspects of their ministry in which they could help people in the most important moments of their lives, when their babies were born, when people died, when they were being married. But that this new knowledge was keeping them from being sincere and genuine, because they felt they were not allowed to share it with their parishioners, or they would lose their jobs. And it was very wrenching and difficult for them. I think many of them would like to continue the kind of good work they do, and I think they would love to be honest, but they feel they can't be. They can't be completely honest in the work they do.
The impression I have is that for most of these men and women, the doubt began in seminary. The doubt began when they were younger, and it was, as you said, what they were learning as part of their training.
Mm-hmm. That was the thing that was very, very interesting to me, because I couldn't figure out what was going on in seminary. And I asked them specifically and in depth what happened to them in seminary, and I came up with 4 different patterns. There were people, some of whom were fascinated with what they learned. When they were learning all this new information, it didn't make them doubt at all. It made them think, well, religion is a lot more interesting than I thought it was. And I can't wait to get out and tell people about it. There are other people who became, they were devastated by what they were learning. They thought, well, maybe, I can't believe this. What am I going to tell people? What am I going to do? But instead of leaving seminary at that time, they thought, well, everybody else seems to be getting along okay here. Maybe if I just stick with it longer, it'll start making sense to me, and everything will be all right. There are other people who they had seeds of doubts. Every now and then something would click with them, and they were saying, gee, that's not right. That doesn't add up. But they would stick it out as well. And then there are other students who, as insightful as they seemed to be when I was talking with them, that just went right past them in seminary. They were very diligent. They said, okay, this is what we're supposed to learn. I'll study it. They didn't really analyze it much or think about it. They just wanted to make good grades and get out. And what one of them told me that really clicked was that seminary is kind of a trade school. You go in with a motive from the beginning that when you get out you want to be a minister, and that this is what you need to do to achieve that. And so you're not going in with the kind of curiosity you might go into in another, perhaps in psychiatry or psychology. That you go in just to learn what you need to know so you can get out and have a church.
For you and Dan, what were the most unexpected findings?
In a way, it was all unexpected because I went in extremely curious and confused. But what I think astounded me the most was the feeling of joy and freedom that people expressed to me when they finally gave up their beliefs that they were trying to hold on to so diligently. That at the end of each interview, I asked, what did you gain and what did you lose as a result of your beliefs changing? And someone would ask, well, do you want me to start with the gains or the losses? And I said, wherever you want to start. And wherever they started, their eyes lit up when they talked about what they had gained. Because as much as they had lost, which was a community, concern about their job, difficulties with their spouses or their extended family, not knowing what they could possibly do professionally besides be working in the church. Whatever they had lost, their gain of intellectual freedom and understanding the world better made up for that. And it was thrilling to me and surprising to me to see that nobody regretted that they had finally come to this conclusion, even though they fought it quite a lot because it interfered so much in their lives.
Who do you think should read this book?
Well, everybody should read this book, don't you think?
Good point, good point, yes.
Well, I'll tell you that I think what the general public could learn is what's going on inside of churches, which, they may say, I'm not terribly interested in that. But most of us, at least at this point in American society, most of us have spent some time in churches. Mm-hmm. And we've formed some opinions about what should be going on and what is going on in there. And you'll get an inside look if you see this. And you'll get a look at pastors, at priests, at ministers, at rabbis that you've never seen before. And if you're someone who likes to read comments, the comment sections and internet forums, and you wonder, well, is this for real? This person, they're saying something that's very interesting, but how do I know that they are who they say they are? How do I know they're not a troll? Well, if you really want to know what's going on the inside and you like to read comments of people, this book is filled with comments. We've taken them straight from the interviews. And you know that these are real people. They're pseudonyms for all of them, but we identify them by their religion, by the situation they're in, in some cases by the part of the country they're in. And you'll know you're hearing from real people about some very, very intimate details of their lives. So that's why everybody should read it.
Now, what would the ministers do who were deep into their career and they've got a congregation, they have a large church, and they've lost their faith? They're, in a sense, atheists, yet they're having to profess faith and run congregations. How would they do that? Well,
it is not that hard, depending on your denomination. If you're a liberal clergy, if you are an Episcopalian, and most of them are liberal, if you're part of the Lutheran church that is very liberal, it's not that difficult. Mainly what you have to do is tell yourself that when you're saying the creed, going through the I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, when you're doing that it's all metaphorical. And that the elements of the liturgy are metaphorical. You find other meanings for it. And actually a lot of the people in your congregation may be thinking the same way. And they're going to church for community and for I would say moral instruction that doesn't necessarily have to be religious. And then these clergy from the pulpit can say pretty much anything. They read the Bible verse of the day and then apply it to modern day life. I'm sure that that happens in churches all over the country, irrespective of the denomination. They teach classes afterwards, and they will teach very modern or controversial authors like Marcus Borg, like Jack Spong, who's a former Episcopal bishop. There's some evangelical writers who are very modernistic. And so they are able to get those ideas across to their parishioners without ever saying that they have any doubts of their own.
Now, what about the fundamentalist preachers who have lost their belief? It seems to me it would be
It's harder for them. It's harder for them.
And what was it like for them, the ones that you interviewed?
They were more desperate. They had much more of a feeling that they had to get out. They were much, and this is a small study, so we can't generalize, but they were much more prone to depression and to suicidal depression. They would snap out of it. I mean, they had the same feeling of joy that I described earlier as the others did, but they went through terrible, terrible periods. And it's more difficult for them to essentially fake it. The way they fake it, as an example, would be the Bible says such and such. It's not I say it, it's the Bible says. Or according to the Bible, this is what you should believe. So and again, they're playing mind games so that they're not coming right out and saying, if you've got to believe this or you're going to hell. They put it in terms of what Christianity says.
Now, in the book, Dan says something about being a little uncomfortable or having to justify writing about in a sense, the mechanisms these people use, the ways they disguise their disbelief amidst maintaining their congregations. Did you also feel uncomfortable about revealing their tricks of the trade, so to speak?
No, that's a good question. I think the reason that Dan felt that way is because he's a good guy. He's a very good guy, very sensitive. But the other reason was that he didn't have firsthand experience with them. He read the transcripts and he listened to some of the tapes, but he didn't get to know them the way I did. He didn't spend several hours with them. And I think if he had, that he would see how much they wanted people to know. They really want the general public to know what's going on because they want it to change, because they don't want themselves to be in the position they're in, and they don't want anybody else to ever have to be in that position again. So although it could be difficult for them and for religion in general, I think it's a good thing, and I want to facilitate it happening. But the communities could remain, let's say, in the form of humanist communities. And of course, we're seeing more of that now. I don't know how successful that's going to be, but it seems to me that it's a natural progression. If people need community, and we know that they do, and if part of the reason they're not staying in the church communities is because they can't believe that stuff anymore, and even the pastors, in the pulpit don't believe it, then what are we going to do? Some change has to be made.
I want to get back to why people should read this book, and why, in a sense, everybody should read this book. I've known Dan for years. I've known you for several years now. I've heard you speak about this project, heard Dan speak about the project. I've talked to some of the ministers that have come out of it. And when I read the book, I really expected just to, in a sense, read more or hear more of what I already knew. And my experience of reading the book was that it was much deeper than what I had heard before.
Well, then why don't you tell me, really? I'll turn the tables here.
Okay. Well, it was, you hear about somebody getting depressed. And I'm a psychiatrist, so you hear about somebody getting depressed, but you start to see the nature of the things that are driving that depression in a much greater light. You see the nature of the conflicts that these people are struggling with. Also, the poignancy of their experience, their attempts to grope with it, I think hadn't really struck me before. And like you said, reading their direct expressions of their inner distress and how to cope with it, that was quite sobering to me. And I thought I knew, but it really wasn't until reading the book that I think I got a deeper understanding at an emotional level. And so I think even those that have heard about this work and sort of think they know would still benefit from reading the book and reading the selection of the voices. The voices of the people coming through, I think is quite unique, quite good. And And all of the various things that you've described are given life through their direct expression. And it also, I had the experience reading the book of, it's like you and Dan have discovered a group of people that we really didn't know about before. It's like a group of people that have run into something in our culture and have had an experience that I think is kind of unique. I've been trying to think if there are any parallels anywhere else of where a certain belief system drives you to do things, and then the belief system just falls away, but you still want to be a good person, you still want to be moral, you still want to help people, but the entire basis of it has shattered.
Yeah, I can't think of another one either, actually. I can think of situations where people go into jobs with an expectation that they're going to be doing wonderful things, and they find out that it's not that way, but they can leave those jobs. They can leave and go on to something else. But in this one,
and there's not a moral belief system necessarily,
right.
At least that I can think of, that's at the basis of that job and the basis of that identity.
And a couple of the people that I interviewed who are staying on relatively comfortably, in the sense that they accept that they're atheists. And when I say that, they will actually. I never used the term atheist in the interview until I heard it from them. I called people what they identified as, whether it be atheist, agnostic, non-believer, whatever. But when a couple of the very strong atheists are staying on in their work because they really do think they're doing something good. They're shepherding a community, and they are helping people on to the next level. I mean, they see themselves that attitudes about religion are changing, and scientific knowledge is such that religion really shouldn't have a future. Supernatural religion, asking or forcing people to believe things that simply couldn't happen. But that there's a value in the community aspects of it, and they see themselves as being part of that transition.
Thank you for watching, and again, thanks to Linda LaScola for being interviewed today. If you found this interesting, I cannot recommend highly enough Linda and Daniel Dennett's book, Caught in the Pulpit, Leaving Belief Behind. It is readily available in paperback or Kindle on Amazon. And I'd also like to thank our videographer, J.D. Mack. Thank you all.